Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Margaret Millett, and I want to thank you for participating today in this webinar, Understanding the Correlations Between Business Continuity Management and Enterprise Risk Management. I would also like to give a thank you to the Ministry of Communications and Technology in Saudi Arabia for inviting me to come spend time with you today. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the comments, and I will be happy to take any questions that you may have. I do have to ask that you put the questions in English. Right now, I do see some writings in there that are in Arabic, and unfortunately, I am not able to read and understand Arabic, so please help me out. Thank you, Ali, for putting things in English. Like I said, I look forward to receiving questions from you because this is how we can have a great interactive session together. So today I'm going to spend time talking to you about the differences between defining enterprise risk management and business continuity management, the synergies between the two of them, or hopefully the synergies that are taking place at your organizations, and then how to think about implementing enterprise risk management and business continuity. And then, like anything in this world, unfortunately, there are some challenges when you are trying to do something new at organizations. So what is enterprise risk management? Now, I'm going to say this. If you don't already know who your internal auditors are and your folks at your organization who run enterprise risk management, find out if you have them. And if you do, I highly recommend that you want to go meet with them to talk to them about where they are on their journey of establishing enterprise risk management and or audit at your organization. And I'm talking about audit a little bit because audit may be wearing that hat today. I think it's really important to understand what the risk framework is at your organization. And I'm saying this because risk is a term that's used by many areas of organizations. And when you look about the key components of helping to look at risk identification and risk assessment and risk treatment and monitoring and reporting, I want to say risk means different things to different departments at your organizations. It can mean something different to the cybersecurity team. It can mean something different to the technology team. It may have a different definition for facilities. It may have a different definition to your enterprise risk management team. And then here you are coming along as the business continuity team, and you may never have another definition about risk management. So I think it's very important to understand what the risk management definition is by your enterprise risk management department so that you can make sure that you're adopting their methodology, their timeframes, their risk categories, because these will be beneficial for you when you're going out and building key components of your program, like your business impact analysis and your risk assessment. It could also be a leverage for you to understand what the enterprise risk management team has already done to identify risk at the organization. They may already say, here are the top threats that we know exist in our organization, but it may be more of the holistic view of your organization versus what you may want to look at in business continuity management. So, for example, enterprise risk management may be worried about, fluctuation in the currency exchanges. They may be worried about where the future of the organization is going, or lagging products that may not be bringing in as much revenue to the company. Or they may have something that's also on the risk registry as it relates to maybe artificial intelligence and how it's being used at your organization. But what you really want to understand is how they're defining those different categories of risk at your company, because when you plot things together for the senior leadership team, you want to make sure that you're using their same methodology. Because, for example, you heard me mention earlier about the various areas, meaning your facilities, your cyber, that might be using those terms as well. You don't want to go to your executive leadership team or your board of directors and not have things align with what others are doing, because what you don't want to have is a meeting with them and then you start and talk about risk and they'll be like, well, I had the facilities department in March and they told me risk was this, and the cybersecurity team was in January and they told me risk was that. And then I thought enterprise risk management was another definition. So make sure that you are working with your enterprise risk management to understand those key risk identifications, how they're assessing risk too, because also when I've looked at risk at the organizations I've worked at, like the facilities, great group of people. However, they're looking at the risk for the facility that we might be moving into, or potentially getting a new lease, or potentially buying land to go build a new building. And they're looking at that geographic region that's basically like within a 5-mile radius of where we might go to a new site. So then they're looking at that as the threats that are basically right there. But I also need to understand the threats that might be on a larger scale as to what's impacting you. I am still seeing a lot of Arabic in the chat, in the comments. So again, if you have a question for me, please put that in English so that I could make sure that I'm answering your questions. Because if you have anything in Arabic, unfortunately, I will not be able to respond to you. Also, looking at the risk treatment, there are some things that can be resolved, in a short period of time. Maybe it's updating documentation that may be, say, something that you want to have closed out in 45 days. There are other things that may require a longer period of time, and that may be 3 months. Like, say, there's an application that needs to get retested. But then there are some things that could actually be, 6 months or longer. For example, something that may need some funding to help mitigate it. And that may require then waiting till you get the budget approval from the next fiscal year in order to be able to move forward to close that out. So I think the other thing that I would highly recommend to you when you're running your programs is to make sure that you are looking at the monitoring and reporting. No matter how small the issue is, you want to make sure that it gets documented so that the executive leadership team knows that there's a concern about something, whether it be like a single point of failure, or that there's a risk out there, but they decided not to take action to mitigate against it. And that could be something that you have to report year over year, because sometimes it's something that they'll accept that risk threshold and decide that they want to continue to not move forward with it. But you want to make sure that it's continued to be monitored so that if something goes wrong, you can say, I've had this on the risk registry and reporting monitoring for X number of years. Now that they can see the look back that you have been doing it year over year, it then may become something that they want to devote the time and resources to help mitigate it so that it can get closed out and that it can get actioned. Now, what is business continuity? This is a great question. Business continuity is the holistic approach of how to go look at the organization's critical functions and what can happen during a disruption. And what we're really trying to do is minimize the potential impact that can actually take down our critical operations. So one thing that people always think of is that when you go out and do business continuity, that you're doing it for the whole organization. And I'm going to say that's just not feasible in this time and day. Most business continuity teams are extremely small. I was just on the phone with someone and they were talking about how they work in an organization in the United States that's 30,000 people trying to cover, I'm going to say, about a little over 300 locations globally. As you can imagine, that's a little bit of a challenge when you're also in the same time zone as a team and you don't have resources that are in other time zones. And is it possible to allow translate action on the video? Help me understand better. Hold on. Could I maybe ask the moderator for the online to assist with maybe trying to put that information into the chat so that we can figure out how this can get translated from English into Arabic? So could I ask the technical team to respond to those so that they might have the ability to put on closed captions so that they could then select the language that they wanted in? Okay, I see a yes coming through. So if someone could put in the chat for me when that's been provided to everybody so that I could continue, because I don't want to continue talking about the slides until I know that it's getting translated from English into Arabic. Thank you, everyone, for your patience while we get this remedied. So I appreciate that you're saying thank you, but I want to also just know, is it being taken care of? So you're not, your thumbs up. So I'm going to keep moving forward. I'm assuming everybody's good. Thank you for everyone for your patience. As I started to say, on business continuity management, it's that comprehensive look at understanding the organization's critical business functions so that they continue after a disruption, and to minimize the impact that could be unfolding during an incident to critical operations. As a business continuity professional, you want to keep in mind that you are not going to have the capacity based on your team size going out and working with the entire organization. It's important that you focus on the critical ones because, again, every year you're going to have to do, in addition to these key components that are listed here of the business impact analysis, the risk assessment, looking at the recovery strategies, and then doing the plan development and testing. It's an iterative process that needs to take place. So you need to go back out and meet with everybody at least once a year or sooner if there's been a major impact to the critical lines of business. Maybe they've added services or they've divested some services, or you've had a reorg, or you've gone through a merger and an acquisition. These could be things that could impact the capability of having, what I'm going to say, a strong plan on file with your stakeholders at your departments that are critical. Okay. I want to talk a little bit more about, the business impact analysis so that we can help you understand a little bit more about what that is. The business impact analysis is how you're going to go out and define, what is determined to be the critical functions within a department, because I'm assuming it would be functions within some of the major departments at your organization. Say, for example, customer service. We all want to make sure that we can answer the telephone in a timely manner or get goods and products out to market. And we want to then look at what helps supports that function. What are the applications? How many people actually support that? Who are the vendors? What do they receive from inputs from another area to then process something? And then do they send work, which would be an output, to another area? It's important to go look at that. And then also understanding the vendors that help support you. There is no organization that does not get by without the support of vendors. It's just the way in which we all operate. So I think it's also important to spend a little bit of time looking at vendors and making sure that they understand their capability to continue to provide goods and services. Because, I know that you're all mostly dialing in from Saudi Arabia. Your workday is Sunday to Thursday. So events don't happen Sunday morning at 9:01 and end at 5:01 on Thursday. You want to make sure that if something happens at 5:02 on Thursday, that you know what to do with them before Sunday at 9:02 rolls around. So it's very important that you understand that relationship with the vendors. And I think it's okay to ask your vendors to answer a questionnaire on business continuity management. You want to make sure that, again, they're doing the same principles of their programs as what you would have in your program at your organization. So, for example, do they have a dedicated team? Do they have an annual policy? Do they update their business impact analysis annually? Do they update their risk assessments? Do they have plans? Do they actually exercise plans? Do they do training, education, and awareness with those key folks who help support those programs? As well as, do they actually report issues up to leadership when something has gone wrong with a component of their business continuity management program? So I think that it's important to do that, as well as to find out what their crisis management protocols are. Because if something goes wrong with something that they support you with, when are you going to get notified? How are you going to get notified? And then what happens if they're doing an enhancement to an application this weekend and that's critical to your organization? You want to know that that's taking place, because you might need to be on standby. You might need to run through some proof of concept once that upgrade's gone through. So then you want to make sure you could be there. So Abraham's put a question into the chat, so I'm going to take that right now. He's asking, how does enterprise risk management support business continuity planning? I mean, in what ways can enterprise risk management enhance the effectiveness of a business continuity management system? And I'm going to say that the enterprise risk management could be one of your champions to make sure that the program is out there. Like I said, you should find out what the risk taxonomy, the risk framework is at your organization and start to adopt it. And then the other thing is because you are identifying what the critical components are at the organization, and say everything is not 100% in order from a sound business continuity management perspective, enterprise risk management could work with you to put that plotted out on the risk landscape for the leadership team, which is also probably sharing that with the board of directors so they can understand the state of readiness as it relates to your key lines of business. And if there's something that needs to be done in order to ensure that that line of business is going to be very viable in the event an incident takes place. Abraham, I hope I've answered your question. If not, please feel free to ask it again in the chat, and I will try to address it another way. So Abu asked a question, do you mean by testing in the last key components in the business drills? So yes, I do mean that in the various types of drills. And they don't have to be what I'm going to say, a Hollywood type drill. There are many ways that you can make sure that you are doing effective exercises and tests. I'll say this, I do break things out differently because in my career, I have managed crisis management, business continuity, and disaster recovery. So I try and think of exercises as the people and the processes. And I then think of test as the infrastructure and the applications. But I know the word testing is pretty commonplace when presenting. Thank you, Abraham, for letting me know you're good. So think about it this way. If you've just reviewed a plan and had it approved with a line of business last week, what I would highly recommend is over the course of the next month, ask to participate in a team meeting that they are having. When I'm putting together my plans, I look at it from the perspective of having a coordinator, which is the person who does the job every day, a manager, they oversee the coordinator and probably some other functions that are going to get documented in the plan. And then what I'm going to say, the plan owner and approver. And that's usually somebody at a more senior level. Again, depending on how titles are at your organization, it could be, say, a director or a vice president. So I'm pretty much only dealing with 3 people, maybe their backups for a total of 6. So then I will conduct a plan walkthrough, which is literally me getting together with everybody that's in that team and or department and having them understand literally from here's the title page saying this is the name of your plan. Here's the approval date that was of, say, April 3rd, 2025, your location. Here's the table of contents. Do you understand that? And then we'll go through each component of the plan to make sure that everybody within the department understands it. Because say my coordinator documented something on page 7, made complete sense to them, the plan manager and the owner and approver, but the rest of the department is like, we don't understand page 7. That may mean that an edit needs to be made and it needs to be clarified out a little bit more so that it is an actual living, breathing document that can be actioned when an event occurs, because you're documenting something for the worst case scenario. However, you don't want to assume that the coordinator is always going to be there to answer your questions. So then I write that up as an exercise report, and I put in everybody who was invited, everybody who attended, and those who were not able to attend and had to send their regrets. And then I have that on file. The other thing that I ask the coordinator to do once the plan's been approved is to set up an electronic file folder where the plan will live and that everybody within the department has access to it. So if we start off the plan walkthrough and I say everybody knows where the plan is, everybody has a copy of it. And if they say no, and then they turn to the individual who's the coordinator and say, hey, can you send me a copy of the plan? I will write that up as a finding because that individual or those individuals should have known where the plan was. And they should have also had a copy of the plan in advance of looking at getting ready for this plan walkthrough. Okay. So Abu, I hope I've answered your question on what do I mean by testing the last key components in the BC drills. So I will say I had some aha moments during COVID in my career. I will say this, a lot of organizations, again, are very small in this day and age, whether it be the business continuity team or any other department. And one thing that happened to the company that I was working for at the time, we were still running mainframe systems. And we had a very small mainframe team because we were still running what I'm going to say, a very small population of our IT environment on mainframe. But what I also realized that we had two individuals who were in the high risk category when COVID started. And if you may recall, they talked about COVID, that there was going to potentially a higher loss of life. And thank goodness there was a lower rate compared to what they were originally predicting. And I realized we only had two individuals who were running mainframe. And I said, do we need to get a third-party contract vendor on file in the event that we needed to have some expertise, because we couldn't pull others from our IT organization to come help out. So I've now started to ask how many people actually support that function, so that if it is one or two people, I want senior management to know that we potentially have a risk here because we don't have enough resources to go around, meaning, somebody could leave the organization today and then we've got to bring on a new hire. And in most companies I've worked at, say your last day of employment is today. I then have to wait and get the approval so I can go post your job. And then I might not have a new person to come on board until the beginning of July. So I have a 3-month gap where I may not have anybody to backfill that role, or I just have one person. And let's face it, I could have one individual then, and they could have a holiday scheduled, or they could get sick. And then I don't know how that function is going to get performed. So, think about that. Think about, again, what do you need to capture for your organization? The traditional things to include in a business impact are, the legal, the regulatory, the reputational, those types of risk that you want to also gather for your organization. And make sure that you're understanding the rules and regs, because rules and regulations are not one and done. There are a plethora of rules and regulations around the globe. I've worked at 10 companies in my career, and everybody thinks I'm an expert on rules and regs. And I'm not, because every time I go to a new organization, there's a new set of rules and regulations that I need to learn. However, fundamentally, they are the same. Have to have a policy, have to have staff, need to have a BIA, need to have a risk assessment, need to have strategies, need to develop plans, and then do the testing and training and education. So think about that. Risk assessments, I'm going to also just say that I'm going to put in the chat here if I'm able to join. No, I am not able. Let me see. No, I am not able to join. So there is an organization in the United States. It's called Kaiser Permanente. It's Kaiser Permanente, Permanente. They're a healthcare provider out of Northern California. And if you go Google Kaiser Permanente all hazards risk, they have a great free risk assessment that you could utilize. And they talk about, the various threats and the, the ratings of high, medium, low. The only thing that I will say is you probably need to streamline it a little bit. For example, I'm from New England. I grew up in Massachusetts. I am, familiar with snowstorms. So they might have something that says, it's a snow flurry, it's a snowstorm, and it's a blizzard. And so if you go to somebody and ask them 3 questions related to snow, they'll be like, aren't these all the same? So, you might need to narrow down your categories a little bit. But the other thing I thought of during COVID is looking at the risk in a different landscape. Like, I've worked for global companies, so I don't know what the risks are that are in your backyard that you should be prepared for, because that's what's in your backyard. Like when I lived in New England, I had to know how to deal with hurricanes, snowstorms, and extreme heat, because sometimes we had some really hot summers. But I don't know what the concerns are for somebody living in Denver, Colorado versus Warsaw, Poland versus Riyadh, Saudi Arabia versus Seoul, South Korea. So I want you to tell me what your backyard concerns are based on where you live. And then, we've had a lot of things happening over the course of the last 5-10 years. Of 1 in 100 phenomenons are now happening once every 5 years. And so if you've got a concern on something like that, I want to know what that is so that I could help you plan for that. And then I want to know if you've got anything that's like just a unique event that's taking place in your city. For example, we know that every 2 years, a city is hosting the Olympic Games. Maybe your city's up next. Or are you hosting a world event? I know I was just recently in Riyadh. I noticed, congratulations, you're hosting World Cup in 2030. That could be impacting some of your capabilities in order to feel comfortable as you head into the various cities in Saudi Arabia hosting the matches. So think about it in that regard. And then again, putting together the recovery strategies that are going to be right. You don't want to over solution something. You want to just make sure you're getting the right solution. And remember that when you're developing plans, make sure that it's actionable for somebody who might not be in the inner circle of working with your team day in, day out, that the coordinator's putting together something that's going to be understood by the other people within the department. And I'm also going to say this, oftentimes leadership will say, hey, can we go test all these plans? But if you're just beginning to build a business continuity program, testing is the last thing that you would be doing. Think of building a business continuity management program as building a staircase. You have to start off with having the policy and the support from executive leadership, and then you do the BIA, and then you do the risk assessment, and then you put the strategies together, then you document the plan, and then you do the testing. So let leadership know, you need to make sure that if you're going to be engaging and conducting exercises and tests with your organization, that you have something that's really viable to go exercise against and not just do something for the sake of making executive leadership happy. You need to tell them that you might not be at that level of maturity to go have a meaningful and impactful exercise with the departments at your organization. I see Ali has asked, what is the role of technology in enhancing enterprise risk management and business continuity? So I'm going to say, find out what products and services you actually have at your organization. I'm going to say technology, again, like anything, can be a plus and a minus for you. It can be an asset or it can be a liability. But I'm going to say for the most part, it should be an asset to you because there are technologies out there that can help with defining enterprise risk management and tracking things, as well as business continuity. There are a lot of software products out there. There's a company in Canada called Premier Continuum. They have Paris Solution, great product. There also is Fusion for business continuity planning. I know that's a very popular product also. There's Archer. There's a whole host of things out there. You can find out about them. Also, there is technology to help track enterprise risk management. Archer is one that's used at a lot of organizations that I have worked at. If you are a ServiceNow user, ServiceNow, I think most people think of ServiceNow as how to go register your help desk ticket. But ServiceNow has a huge platform that might be able to enable you to understand, how you could leverage the technology. The one thing I will say that you want to find out about, Ali, is one, how much some of these products and services cost, and meaning, as we know, nothing is free in this world. So you may need to get some quotes on what those are to go out to market. So you may need to start gathering information today to put together your 2026 budget. I'm just saying that because the companies I've worked at, my budget cycle's always been January to December. So if you've got an ask, go out and find it. I'd say the other thing that I would also ask of you is, what about using internal resources? So for example, I mentioned ServiceNow. You might have it. They could tell you today you can use it for free, but then next year you might get asked to pay for it. So always ask, what's the cost of using this product, even though you get it for free? Because like I said, nothing is for free. If you have to go out to market to go get a product, make the vendor work for you, meaning they do RFPs, requests for product information all day, or requests for proposals. Ask them to send you some of those RFPs. They might need to sanitize and take out the company name, but use that to help you build out what you want their RFP to be to go out to market. Also, always ask for what's a job description to run these products, because again, I'm a business continuity professional. I'm not an IT person, so I don't know how to go run these products and services. So ask them to give that to you, so you could, use that to maybe say that you might need technical assistance, or you might need to understand what it means to get technical assistance from your IT department at your company. And also, if you're going to do a major implementation of a new product or service, make sure you're using your project management teams. They can help you facilitate, the implementation, because again, I'm not a project manager. Make sure that they are then, using that to coordinate meetings between your IT, you, the vendor, et cetera. And then they should be doing what I'm going to say, weekly or bi-weekly reporting on the status of how you are doing. So say you buy a new product today, and you've got to figure out what your timeline is to go live. I'm just using an example. So say you're going to get done, you hope to get done by, the end of this year. I would say put in that you'll have it done by the end of March 31st of 2026. Nothing goes according to plan. Buy yourself some time and some wiggle room. It's always better to deliver ahead of schedule and on time and under budget than be delayed and over budget. So think about those things. And also, like I said, if you need to use project management or IT at your organization, figure out what that cost of the resource is. Again, there could be what I'm going to say, moving the money on budgets. I'll call it funny money. But at the end of the day, you're probably going to have to pay for a resource for IT and project management. And you also want to start and let those teams know, give them a heads up that you're going to need their assistance, because, they only have X number of resources as well. So they'll need to know, like, I'm going to need a project manager for 6 months. I'm going to need IT support starting in Q3 or Q2, Q3, so that they can, again, get those resources lined up for you. So Aaliyah, I hope I answered that question on the role of technology and enhancing enterprise risk management and business continuity. Can you repeat the name of the entity I just mentioned? I'm assuming you're talking Kaiser Permanente. That's Kaiser, and then Permanente, Permanente. And they are based in Northern California, and they're the ones that have a free risk hazard or all hazards risk tool that you can, vulnerability tool, I believe it is. All hazards risk vulnerability tool is what it's called. I did mention some products for business continuity management software. As I said, there is Parasolution, which is from Premier Continuum in Montreal, Canada. There is Fusion. If you go to the DRJ, which is the Disaster Recovery Journal here in the United States, they have a list of a lot of products and services that are vendor oriented. You can look at them. They also have a glossary of terms that are out there. So they're very good at trying to say, here's everything that's, here's how we're going to define incident. And they'll look at every organization that taps into it and will have that available to you. And so say there's a new term that's coming into play for our profession, chances are they will have a definition out there probably within the next month or so. And if not, they will have at least a placeholder saying they're working on what the preferred definition is. And then they will reference where the final version of that term came from after looking at everything and agreeing upon consensus. Also, I didn't talk about it for products and services, but there are lots of emergency notification tools out there. There's Alert Media, there is OnSolve, which is a rapid way to go send a message out to your stakeholders within a number of minutes saying, hey, we're going to have to close the office tomorrow due to a sandstorm in the greater Riyadh region. And that can get to people very quickly. And this way they know not to come to the office tomorrow. What about ISO or Abu? I hope I answered your question about repeat the name of the entity I just mentioned. Somebody put in what about ISO 22301? Again, great question. That is the ISO standard for business continuity management. Another ISO standard that I think that you should all be familiar with is 27001. Again, that number is 27001. That is a cybersecurity ISO. Now, the ISO 22301, if memory serves me correct, was last issued in 2019. I cannot recall when ISO 22701. Sorry, I'm getting my numbers mixed up. So I would say find out, depending on where you work. I've always worked for the chief information security officers within my career. So we've actually sometimes had to gotten certified, the cybersecurity team has gotten certified against ISO 27001. Thank you for the putting in that in, Sharman. I appreciate the heads up and the helping hand. I would say, again, if you don't have a copy of them, they do charge for them. So, and I think they're about $500. Again, don't quote me on the prices. So you may want to get a copy of that. Or if you have a relationship with like, EY or Deloitte or somebody, one of the big four, ask them if there's a copy that you could have. If you have to go buy it, it's not easily shareable. I've gotten around to it. Don't tell the BSI who issues them that if you get a copy of it and then you print it and then you scan it, you can save it as a PDF so you can share it with others within your team. So that may be something that you want to consider doing if you feel you need a copy of it. I'll say this, excuse me, the BCI, the Business Continuity Institute out of London, England, they actually have a very good framework based on their good practice guide, version 7.0. That was issued 2 years ago. They've been around for over 30 years. They actually provide a great framework for you to use to go put together a continuity program. People can also get certified against the ISO standards. Most IT cybersecurity teams have gotten certified because it's a big ask for their board of directors. And sometimes they can get a discount on their cybersecurity insurance. So they do go against getting that. They do go get it. The one thing I will say is that is something that you have to maintain, because I believe it's every 2 years, the ISO board comes back in to recertify whether you're up to the standards based on it. Now, the other thing that I will say is if you are going to go out and purchase any of the ISOs, look at the year when it was last published. For example, when you look at the ISOs, it'll go ISO 22301 : and then it'll have a 4-digit number. So for example, I thought the ISO 22301 was of 2019. So it would then read : 2019. Well, that's 6 years ago. So I'd be asking the BSI, the British Standard Institute, if it's going to get updated this year, because if that be the case, I would wait, because a 6-year-old document could be starting to get a little archaic, and that might not be where you want to be reviewing things to go look at. Same thing with the ISO standard. Again, if you don't have a copy of that, see if you can get a copy, or if you go buy it, figure out what that is. Like I said, I don't think that it's absolutely necessary to be ISO 22301 compliant. You can say that you're aligned to it, meaning you're looked at it, you're familiar with it, but you built your own program based on, I'm going to say, I look at all the standards out there that I might have to adhere to, or other bodies of work that can help me. Like I said, there's the ISO, there is the the BCI. I also have looked at the Disaster Recovery Institute International's framework. And also in the United States, there is, for the federal government, there is, it's still, I believe it's still being utilized. I'm not sure based on the current administration if it's still being a federally approved document, but it was called FFIEC. So that's F as in federal, F as in federal, I as in institution, E as in examine, and C as in council. It's a great handbook to guide you through on how to go build a program from start to finish. Talks about leadership commitment. And, I think that could also help you. It also has nice summary bullets of what each section is. So if you needed to potentially go build a PowerPoint, that might give you some speaking points that you might want to include in the deck. So I hope that I've answered the questions as it relates to ISO 22301, as well as, anybody who was then going to tap in and ask about 27001. So then there's a question, are they referred to as the Business Continuity Recovery Group? Not sure what that question means, but I'm just going to say, there's opportunities to call the name of your team various things. So I've been in this industry for over 30 years. So for when I first started, it really was called business recovery. Then it's evolved to business continuity. It's now on the merge of business resilience. So figure out what's right and what you want to call your organization. And then, I also highly recommend that you go meet with your marketing department, see if they could go create a logo for you so that you could maybe have your company logo and Dex in the upper, left-hand corner, your logo in the upper right. You can put it down in your email signatures. And then also you could use that to do marketing when you're talking about embracing business continuity management at your organizations. I just think it's a good thing for you to get out there. And also, if you haven't created a mission, a vision, and a value statement for enterprise risk management or business continuity, I recommend that you go do that, because you need to go sell yourselves on what you are doing and offering to the organization. Okay. So the relationship between enterprise risk management and business continuity management, I'm going to say they are, like I've said before, they are interconnected but distinct processes. Typically at organizations, there is a chief risk officer that reports into the CEO. I have yet to see a chief resiliency officer. They're slowly evolving. However, they are usually buried within another C-suite person. So they do not actually have that C-suite seat. They are at what I always refer to, like when you get together for holidays, the adults get together at the dining room table and the kids have their kids' table. At least that's how it is in the United States. I always feel the chief resiliency officer has a seat at the kid table. So that is one huge distinction between there. And usually because the enterprise risk management person is definitely talking more to the C-suite as well as to the board of directors, that is something that they get a little bit more face time. So I will say this, you want to make sure that you or your leadership person who is your executive sponsor for business continuity management is getting that face time with the board of directors and senior leadership to let them know about the risk that may be presenting as it relates to business continuity management. As it says here on the slide, enterprise risk management is looking at the risk that are taking place, throughout the entire organization. And that really is their job, because let's face it, there's a lot of volatility that could be taking place. There are some things that could be impacting their continued ability to reach profit. Do they go into new markets? And also what's just unfolding. I do remember working at one organization, and this was, I want to say just before COVID. I think it was like 2018. I may be wrong in the time frame, but this is when Europe went on to the euro. I believe it was 2001, and there was a big push to get everybody onto the euro. Some countries remained using their own currency, like I believe most of the Scandinavian countries still use their version of their kroner for currency, but 4 countries had some financial instability. And they gave it the code name PIGS, P-I-G-S. And so that stood for Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. And I can tell you, having worked in financial services the majority of my career, there was a big scramble of like, what are we going to do if those 4 countries revert back off the euro and then have to go back to their local currency? That was going to be a lot of enhancements to systems. And so what was that going to mean for the organization to be ready in the event that they had to go quickly back from those currencies of the euro to individual country currencies? I can only imagine what's going through the minds of an enterprise risk management team today with concerns on potential volatility in pricing and supply chain. So I am sure that they are looking at that, as well as realizing that, again, all organizations rely on vendors in order to help them run. And those vendors rely on vendors to help them run. So it's not just the third parties, it's the fourth parties, et cetera. So I would imagine enterprise risk management is spending a lot of time with legal and vendor management to make sure that they are understanding the financial solid great track for the companies that they have engaged with. And then for business continuity management, you're really here to be making sure that those critical functions that you have are able to continue during a disruption. And I'm going to define a disruption as, if we're all doing our jobs right, we should only be invoking what I'm going to say business continuity and crisis management plans maybe once a year. But yet we do know that they are used when smaller scale things are unfolding in your organization. So you want to just make sure that, like I said, you're planning for the worst case scenario, but we do know that elements of these plans are used when something goes wrong. They can be even used sometimes when it's an incident that's impacting the production. We all know that there are production issues that can take place at organizations daily. So sometimes aspects of it are there. Or, for example, I'll say this, there could be a fire alarm and you've got to transfer your customer service calls from one site to another. In a way, you're invoking your business continuity, but you're only doing it maybe for 30 minutes. And then you're transferring those calls back from your secondary site to your primary site. The main thing here is you really want to understand that both enterprise risk management and business continuity are looking at risk. It's just that one is the bigger risk picture for the organization. You've got a subset of it, but you really want to make sure, because you're here to make sure that when something catastrophic happens to your organization, that enterprise risk management is understanding the risk that you are identifying for those critical functions, and that is on their risk registry, so they can also help report that to leadership and the board and potentially assist with mitigating those risks and potentially closing them out, or making sure that under leadership and the board are understanding what it means to accept the risk this year and potentially year after year. Feel free to continue to put your questions in the chat. I am monitoring that along the way. So thank you. What are the synergies between enterprise risk management and business continuity management? So ultimately, we're all here to ensure that all of us are looking at risk. And the other thing that I always try to tell people is, looking at business continuity management and looking at new products and services or new technologies, it's not just today. I need you to think about it for tomorrow, in your worst case scenario, or what is your peak volume that you have. So for example, I worked at eBay, and their peak volume time was November 15th to roughly January 15th, when it was the holiday season. And I'm sure that you're somewhat familiar with eBay or another platform like it, where you have to make sure that you can go out and you could, list a new item. Like I'm wearing a blue sweater, so I want to go sell this today. I want to be able to list this blue sweater. You all want to go bid on it so that you could buy it. So you wanted to make sure that you could list on it, that you could bid on it, and then that you could buy it. And then you want to make sure that you can go pay for it, because that's what's really needed in order to keep things moving at eBay. And I remember my first year I got there and we were getting ready for, what I'm going to say, peak season. And I'm asking about all the IT servers that help support the website that could see the functionality through from A to Z. And I was saying, so all the disaster recovery servers can take the full load plus during peak capacity. And they couldn't. So we had to make sure that we were enhancing everything, because you don't want to go to senior leadership and the board of directors saying, yeah, we've had a problem and we're running at 75% capacity. That's not what you want to do. That's probably one that's going to be the start of the end of your career, because you're supposed to be the subject matter expert. So when you're doing new things at your organization, whether you're implementing a new site, new business process, or new technologies, you want to start and say, do we need to think about business continuity and disaster recovery? Do we need to, get a duplicate call center? Do we need to worry about, this capacity? Or even if you're bringing on a critical vendor, is this vendor going to be soluble? What is that they're going to provide? What's their business continuity, disaster recovery, crisis management program? And make sure that you are identifying those things. Now, I've talked about business continuity roles. And when I write a policy, I will say, you've heard me mention the term the coordinator, the plan manager, and then, the plan owner and approver. I won't list who those individuals are, but I will talk about who they are, what that role is. And I will then also have a more detailed document indicating what I'm looking for those individuals to do to help support my program for before a disaster, before an event, during an event, and after event. because, there's pre-planning that needs to take place to get ready for if something happens. So that's getting the plan in, potentially getting budget, doing the training, education, and awareness. Then during the incident, I need you to be actually using the plan that I've given you and not some playbook that you have over here that wasn't reviewed and approved. So think about that. And then afterwards, what I need you to do after an event is potentially help me put together an after action item report for leadership. You may need to update your plan. You may need to go out to market to go get a new product or tool to help you because it wasn't sufficient on how you were able to manage your recovery. So think about, what that is. And then as I stay here on the collaboration, it really is you as business continuity help feed insights into enterprise risk management on what you're actually finding. Because again, think of enterprise risk management as looking at the organization at 30,000 feet, where you're going closer at the 10,000 foot level. So you're seeing things that they're not necessarily seeing. And again, they're looking at it the holistic, because really the other thing that enterprise risk management is making sure is that, for example, if you're a publicly traded company, that nothing's going to happen to the stock price, that you're going to have positive things happening within the organization that's going to get generated out in the media, and that they are making sure that everything's going to be solvable so that we can continue to move forward, get to be profitable, continue to be profitable, or bring on new products and services that are a right fit for where the organization wants to be tomorrow and in the future. Okay, how can enterprise risk management support business continuity? So again, they've got to provide that holistic look at risk. They're actually going to help you understand what the threat landscape is for the risk at your organization. They are going to provide that framework, or they may already tell you, here are the critical things that are critical to the organization, which what I'm going to say will help you, jumpstart your business impact analysis. And they should already have documented what they want to capture for the strategic, operational, financial, and maybe hazard risk that could trigger business interruptions. Now, I'm going to say in the companies that I've worked at, I have not seen enterprise risk management really go into depth on the hazards risk. I think they think about it, but they don't go into the breadth and depth that a business continuity risk assessment would do. Because like I said, I actually use a lot of the information from my risk assessment to do the scopes of my simulations for the exercises for my lines of business and or IT. I share the results with them. And the other thing that I do, when I do a risk assessment, typically what I do is I do one for the office, because if you're in a large campus, and I've worked in a lot of large campuses, there could be 3,000 employees there. We might all have a different view on what the risks are. So I will get together with what I'm going to say the maybe top 10 senior executives at that site, and I will run them through the risk assessment, and I will say, what do you think the big concerns are? And they'll look at what they know has potentially happened in the past, what's happening in the, elsewhere, and also how they've reacted when something has impacted them in the past. I think the other thing that both business continuity and enterprise risk management should be doing and help feed each other is horizon scanning. There are a lot of great reports out there that are published annually to help you look at risk. One that comes out every January is the World Economic Forum report. Again, excuse me, that's called the World Economic Forum report. And that's been published for many, many years. The World Economic Forum has a big meeting in Davos, Switzerland, annually. I want to say it's the end of January, beginning of February. And a lot of world leaders and heads of businesses, big companies will go there to hear what's being said about risk. And I highly recommend that you go get a copy of that report. So, you could go look at the 2025 report, but you could also go get the 2020 report to see what the look back was then, and if they actually forecasted it right. The thing that's also nice about that report is they will look at it from a global perspective of what the concerns are, and then they will also break it down according to region. So you could go find out what they put down, say, for the EMEA region, and see how that might be something that you want to take to your enterprise risk management or your leadership team to say, hey, these are what the concerns are, and here's one that we maybe didn't have on our radar. Do we need to add it to our all hazards risk or our enterprise risk management threat landscape? So, think about that. Also, if you have, again, back to those relationships with the EY, the Deloittes of the world, find out they probably do horizon scanning reports also, and that they could also maybe share that, because also most organizations have what I'm going to say, that annual relationship with one of the big four. That could actually be beneficial for you. And if you use any products like the, Fusion or Alert Media, ask them if they have any forecasting all hazards reports that you could use as well. I know the BCI, the Business Continuity Institute out of England, they also publish one. So if you remember the BCI, you might want to go download that as well. Okay. And then how does business continuity support enterprise risk management? Again, I'm going to say we are the ones that look at the real world. When, say, a building has a flood, or there's a snowstorm coming, or a hurricane or something, not that enterprise risk management's not aware of it, but they're not really getting the in-breadth and depth of what's happening with real world things that are impacting them. Or, the other thing that can be is if an application keeps hiccuping or is just not functioning properly, that's maybe something that I would be bringing forward to them, because, you could find out that, like I had this happen at one company. They had very small windows to patch the applications. So the applications weren't current. And let's face it, it's just like your laptop. If you haven't pushed the latest and greatest updates to your laptop or to your iPhone, it's not going to necessarily perform all the functionality that you want it to. Well, we're usually 1 or 2 behind, maybe on our phones or our laptops. But can you imagine if a critical application is further behind on that, on patches? So, I had to collaborate with enterprise risk management to actually go have an audit done on the applications that were critical to the organization to get them up to what I'm going to say -2 on patching, so that they were always running the latest and greatest. And that was kind of an eye opener, because you would have thought that, again, organizations would have been kept current on something like that, but it wasn't happening. And so it turned into a big project. It cost a lot of money. But it was the right thing to bring to their awareness, so that they could understand, like, I was having trouble with a critical app and it just, was not performing time and time again. So that's how I was able to get it to the forefront, is by raising that to the leadership team in enterprise risk management. Also, what I'm going to say is the business continuity can help enterprise risk management respond to align with the response strategies to make sure that the organization is going to return to normal very quickly and effectively. Remember, we're here to help making sure that things are fine. And also, when it's a very big event, enterprise risk management and audit will probably get asked by senior leadership to go write a report as to, when did this event happen? How did it happen? What were the steps? What could we have done better? So they're going to create what I'm going to say more of an executive after action item report or event report that's going to get shared out. So the other thing that I recommend is, if you already know there's an event taking place and you can start and sense that it's bigger than what I'm going to say a minor incident or a smaller event has been, make sure that you are taking notes to cover your back, so that when they come back to you, you are going to have some notes to work with. Because if you're working a major event, and I'm going to say this again, this is based on Margaret Mills' experience. Usually when I work a big event, 2 other minor things are taking place as well that I need to go handle. So I've got a lot of stuff going on in my head, trying to keep all the ducks in a row, trying to keep my team going, asking the right questions. So if something started today on April 10th, and then somebody comes to me on April 15th, I'm not necessarily going to have a clear reminder in my brain as to what actually started to happen on the 10th, the 11th, potentially the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, if I have to work over the weekend. So do yourself a favor, cover your back, make sure that everything's getting put into a risk registry, and you're keeping your own private log when an event unfolds, so that you are able to have all your facts in your head. What is the difference between a contingency plan and a business continuity plan? Excellent question. They are the same. It's a different terminology. Some people within the profession will say contingency plan, business continuity plan. When they talk contingency plans, it will be business continuity. Now, there are different types of plans also. So Like I'll say, some people can talk about a contingency plan and refer to the crisis management plan. They could also refer to the disaster recovery plan. And so even though I've worked with the business, the IT folks, I have them put together a business continuity plan for what that IT related area does. And then I'll have a detailed disaster recovery plan for the applications or the hardware that they are supporting. Some people could also refer to the evacuation plan as a contingency plan on how to evacuate the building. I think it's just listening to when somebody says that as to what context they're talking about a contingency plan. But for the most part, when I hear people say contingency plan, I'm always thinking of the business continuity plan. But I actually then have heard others talk about different things. So I hope I've answered that individual's question on what's the difference between a contingency plan and a business continuity plan. Now, the other thing I want to just point out, because this person has raised a good point. If you ever have to do any work with clients, like say you've got a large bank that wants to sign on to your organization to go get your products and services, they may provide you with a due diligence questionnaire, or there may be a particular regulation that's been written by somebody. Remember, the people who are writing these are not necessarily business continuity management experts or an enterprise risk management person. So they may interchange the terminology and use it incorrectly. For example, I have seen some that have been written where it says, can you tell me about the business continuity plan to get the application up and running within the recovery timeframe objective? That's not business continuity, that's disaster recovery. So if you run business continuity, but you don't run disaster recovery, you may need to say to the disaster recovery team, they've used the wrong terminology. Therefore, you are the one who needs to be able to answer this, and then start using the terminology disaster recovery in the response so that the reader can kind of get a free education out of you. I think the other thing that's really important on this is tying the right terminology to your policies. And so, like I've said, in my career, I've had responsibility at times for crisis management, business continuity, and disaster recovery. Sometimes I've just had crisis management and business continuity. Sometimes I've just had business continuity. I write my policy for what I am responsible for. If I only have responsibility for business continuity, then I am going to only have a business continuity policy. I will then let the policy, keeper at my organization know that the other areas need to have their own policy for crisis management and disaster recovery, because at the end of the day, chances are we are not in the same leadership team circle. And also, I don't want to tie my dependency on my policy to somebody else who might not keep it current by trying to write my policies to be updated and approved and go live on January 2nd, assuming a fiscal year of January to December. And also, I will make reference that, there's a disaster recovery policy or a crisis management policy, but I only write my policy from what I'm for, because then if there's an audit, it should only be for business continuity, or I want to understand what the scope of that audit is. And I want enterprise risk management also to know that there's another team that takes care of crisis management and another team that takes care of disaster recovery, or whatever that may be. So that's just a little tidbit for all of you too. When I'm going back to Abu's question that he just put in the chat, or she, my apologies if I used the wrong pronoun. When we mention business continuity, most people think that it relates to operating activities more than financial activities. What do you think? I do think it has to be related to financial activities, because we need to make sure that, what I'm going to say, that goods and services are being paid for at your organization. That, if you work truly in financial services, there are deadlines and usually regulations that say, if I want to redeem money on my account today, I have to do it by the time the market closes. Or if I send you money to go open up a new account, you have to do it as of today so that I can invest as of April 10th. You can't wait and sit on it and do it April 17th. So I do think it's whatever is defined at your organization as being critical is what needs to get looked at. Because if you go look at true financial operating services, there are other operating activities that help support it. And therefore, they do need to probably get included, because I do look at customer service centers as usually being extremely critical to making sure that the lights stay on at an organization. So again, I hope I've answered that person's question. Abu, I hope I answered your question. And if I haven't answered your question, please feel free to let me know. You're not hurting my feelings if I have not answered the question properly. So in terms of being really strong on implementing things for key steps for enterprise risk management and business continuity, like I've said at the beginning, get your policy written at the beginning. If you've never written a policy, the chances are there is a policy team at your organization. Make sure that you have the latest and greatest template that they are using. Ask to see some examples of what they feel are really great policies that have been written within your organization so that you can leverage them. And also remember your policy needs to be as of your capabilities as of today. If you're building a program out from scratch and you just started 6 months ago, you're going to probably have a small policy because you're evolving and growing. And I always say, like anything, when you're building a program, and remember, you are building a program, not a project, because a project has a specific start and stop date, where you might have projects to help set up your program, like implementing a business continuity management software tool. But you are a program, and you need time to crawl, and then you need time to walk, and then you will be able to run. But you're also going to have peaks and valleys on your journey because you might be switching out products and services. You're going to have people change. You're going to also realize like the level of maturity is going to change. You're going to add new products and services. So think about that. So that's what I'm saying. Establish what the governance and the leadership commitment is, and make sure you have a strong advocate as your leadership commitment, your sponsor. And if you don't, well, I know it's hard and it's challenging, but you may need to ask for a new sponsor because they need to make sure that they're feeling comfortable to go to the leadership and the board on your behalf, okay? You're also here to start and identify those risks. What other risk assessment tools that you want to have? So that's why I think it's really important to understand what the enterprise risk management team has done. Not every organization has enterprise risk management. So if you get off this webinar and then next week you go into your office and you start asking all these questions, you may or may not have enterprise risk management. So if you don't, ask internal audit if they are there. You should at least have internal audit in your organization. You're both looking at what's critical to the organization, but like I said, you're looking at it from the 10,000 feet. Enterprise risk management is looking at it from 30,000 feet. You're also just looking at strategies. The enterprise risk management may have a larger strategy and their risk profile is going to be different, or their risk registry is going to be different. But you want to make sure that you're collaborating with them and doing that information sharing. And then the other thing is they're not necessarily going to do as much testing, but you want to make sure that you're working with them to update them on what you've been doing to test on these things and the monitoring and the improvement. Remember, everything's going to take time. Go with the old adage, Rome wasn't built in a day, and therefore neither is your continuity program, and neither is enterprise risk management. So you all need time in order to evolve. And like I said, you're going to have the ebbs and flows and the peaks and valleys within your programs. So you want to make sure that leadership is understanding that, because you can go on a trajectory like this and be great, and then things change, and so you want to just make sure that leadership is understanding that. The other thing that I would recommend to you is really make friends with internal audit. Once you have that policy, make sure that they understand it, and that you understand what the audit schedule is that they're going to have for that upcoming calendar year. Most organizations will have a calendar that they would do for the year, or if not annually, they'll do every 6 months. You want to then find out what the audit schedule is for your constituents, that you can work with them to find out, when there's going to be an audit. I'll say this: if I know that there's an audit coming up in July, I want to work with that line of business today to get everything ready. I don't want to have the ink dry on everything as of June 30th. So I try and figure out, how to get everything done prior to the start of those audits. Also, I do the same when I know that there's lines of business that might need to report out to clients. Like I've done a lot of reporting out to clients who hired on to get products and services from the companies I've worked at. Like I had one organization where I knew in June, one of the big banks in the United States was going to be asking a lot of questions. Again, I'd be working with them starting at the beginning of the year to get everything pretty much wrapped up by the end of April. So again, I wasn't coming in with the ink dry on May 31st to go talk about things. And then the other thing that I'm going to also just say is, make sure that if you have to have multiple policies, because like I've worked in organizations that had large global footprints of, being in 40 to 65 countries, make sure that those policies that are being required, like I've done a lot of work in Australia. And so Australia regulators typically require a local policy. Just make sure they're taking your policy, do file save as and put in -Australia. They might have a different logo or country, whatever. Just have them add that. You also want to keep track of how many of those local policies are out there so that if there's an audit in those countries, you can make sure that they're using the latest and greatest from your organization. And then every year when I get the policy updated and approved, I use that as a training opportunity for my coordinator, plan owner, and approver and manager so that they understand what's changed from last year to this upcoming year. Abu, I love how you're coming in with those questions. So thank you very much. If I have to choose one function to implement in my organization, enterprise risk management or BCM, which one should I choose? Ooh, that is a tough question. I would take that to senior leadership and present what the differences are between enterprise risk management or business continuity management, because they're two separate functions. And usually they are not managed by the same group of people. So I would make sure that you're getting clear direction on what leadership wants and that they understand the difference between enterprise risk management and business continuity management. Okay, I hope I've answered your question there. And if you end up taking on the enterprise risk management, that's usually a higher level in the C-suite. So make sure you're getting a pay raise, okay? The governance and the leadership commitment. Again, enterprise risk management is going to be looking at risk across all the lines of businesses. And so is business continuity. But again, you're looking at the critical functions that need to be up and running where, I'm going to say this enterprise risk management could be looking at also what I'm going to say, like maybe corporate real estate. Like, we've been in a building that's now decrepit and we've got to get out of there. That could actually end up landing on a risk registry for enterprise risk management that they might need to go work with them to go get a new facility, or they are starting to see that, I've worked at some organizations where vendors have gone bankrupt. Therefore, they're scrambling to work with, they're spearheading then getting legal and procurement to go get a new vendor replacement out there. I'm sure right now enterprise risk management is working with vendor management and legal to go look at a lot of critical suppliers at organizations just based on the volatility that's taking place in the world today. And so that I'm sure is one big picture where you as a business continuity management professional, I do not recommend that you get involved with vendor management if you can help it. Like I said, I try to provide to my key constituents at organizations a detailed questionnaire that can say, here are some questions that you might want to ask a vendor that we want to go do business with or renew a contract with, of literally, like, for example, do you have a policy? Do you have executive support? Do you have a trained team? Do they have training? I try and write these things as yes, no questions so that you can easily say, here's the answers. I tell them what I think the preferred answers are. One thing I will say is when you are writing a questionnaire, do not lump multiple questions into one. I'm going to use a silly question, but I think you can understand it after I start and say this. If I ask you, do you like chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry ice cream? You are going to say yes, whether you like one flavor or all three flavors. And I need to specifically know, is it chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry? And so if I had to go ask that question of a vendor, I would ask it as three separate questions. So this way I would know what's their tolerance level for being able to support chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry ice cream. So think about not commingling things together when you are writing questionnaires. And I've written that out and I do it. And it's usually typically about 100 questions. And the other thing I sometimes get asked is like, can I make this shorter? I look at it as if I'm going to go engage with a major organization and we're going to go give them lots of money, I should be able to ask more than 20 questions. To me, like, for example, when I bought houses in my lifetime, I'm going out to the real estate agent and or the seller, and I want to ask every question out there. And I've probably asked more than 20 questions. In fact, it's not probably, I have asked more than 20 questions. So, think about the money that you're engaging and that you're going to be signing on the dotted line for a contract that's from anywhere from 1 to 3 years or whatever the standard contract engagements rules are in Saudi Arabia. Think about what that is or elsewhere in the world, because, it's very hard to get out of a contract once you've signed on the bottom line. And like I said, have regular meetings, figure out what the cadence should be between you and enterprise risk management. I'd say initially, if you're starting that relationship, I would recommend them to be monthly but then after that, determine if it's like every other month, once a quarter, what's the right cadence on how you can show that you are collaborating. Because again, you want the leadership from the enterprise risk management team and the leadership from business continuity meeting going into the executive leadership team and the board to say that you have been collaborating and working together. Again, the risk identification and assessment, they should be helping set what the requirements are to go look at the risk for strategic, operational, and financial, which you can then use for your BIA and your risk assessment. And then that's where I think you can take your data that you've collected, share that with them so that they understand how things are, because they could also move their landscape of the risk threat landscape with senior leadership based on the data that you are giving them. And that could also help. Not always. Everybody always thinks that sometimes when you bring something that's a sticky situation to senior leadership, that it automatically is a guarantee of more funds and or people. That is not necessarily the case. Sometimes you've got to spread it around to make it work within your organization. But again, make sure that you're always putting things out on your risk registry, even if it's something that's year over year, so that if something backfires, can show that you've been stating that as a risk for a while. Okay, defining critical business functions and processes. You want to make sure that you're also keeping things at a high level. You as the business continuity team are going to help define what those critical functions are. You may find from some organizations that leadership has designed, or already determined what the top, 6, 12 functions are at the organization. Great, that's what you can go work with. They might not know. So then the other thing is sometimes I think you got to look at, annual reports to help back in, figure out what those are, or again, go talk to enterprise risk management if they're able to help set you on a course of direction as to what they think is critical. I would also say it's important to listen in town hall meetings that hopefully your executive leadership is having, say, every 2 weeks or every month. If all of a sudden they're talking about, a new product or a new location, time and time again, chances are that is critical. Therefore, if it's not on your radar, it should be. And you really want to understand what those functions are and making sure that when you're talking about risk, that you are aligning with enterprise risk management so that the critical business functions fall into their taxonomy of what they're looking at for identifying risks. Developing the strategies. So again, enterprise risk management may be looking at this. They may not. It may be something that they're, again, looking at the higher level. You've heard me talk about insurance. It's very important that you understand what insurance products your organization is going out to buy to protect the business. There's cybersecurity insurance. There's business interruption insurance. You as the business continuity professional should understand what those are, so you can also make sure that you're providing information to help go support those policies. You may be able to get a reduction of them. The other thing that I would say, I think a lot of organizations don't tap into enough to understand about what those insurance companies can do for you at time of incident. So make sure somebody's had some of these discussions as to what they may be able to help you do to mitigate a situation or get out of it faster, especially as it relates to cybersecurity. They may have resources that could be at your disposal to help you, especially like with ransomware. So ask some of those questions. Again, you want to also make sure that enterprise risk management is looking at the vendors that you are working with. There shouldn't be any single points of failure. However, often at organizations in this time of not wanting to spend more money than is needed, we will put all of our eggs in one basket, have faith in that one vendor, and think that nothing will ever happen to them. But I don't think that's realistic in this day and age. So I recommend that there is diversity when you're doing your outsourcing. So make sure that that's a question that you are asking of your enterprise risk management. And then, you're working on those strategies, whether it be, the backup for IT, the alternate locations, your business continuity plans, and crisis management. Now, I will say this, if you are just starting on your journey of putting together a business continuity management program at your organization, one of the very first things that you should do is get a crisis management team together and a plan. It might not be perfect, but you want to have something in place in the event something happens and goes wrong next week. You want to at least know who you can call. You want to at least starting to identify what needs to be thought of from it, be the human resources, communications, legal, cyber, facilities, all these things. Make sure that it's being looked at. And then again, these should start to align so that when something happens, that the organization is going to be sound and resilient and nothing's going to go wrong. And that enterprise risk management may be monitoring these bigger events to make sure that they're understanding things so that they can help support you with the after action items or provide services that might be needed in order to get you out of an event, especially if it's a large event. Okay. So understand how they can help you build a better and stronger organization at your company. Now, challenges. Like anything, there are always challenges at an organization. You may have difficulty aligning ERM to business continuity management strategies. I'm going to use a sports analogy. In the United States, baseball is a very popular game. If you're not familiar with the rules, I'll just give you a quick synopsis. In the baseball game, there are 9 innings. And so a player gets to go to bat multiple times during the game. They might strike out, you get three balls. And if you strike out, you don't get to go to first base. If you go to first base, then, you have that opportunity to maybe to go to second and third and then do a home run. But what I'm saying is you have multiple opportunities to go back and keep retrying. It may not happen at once, but keep going to bat to find out if you can get what you need. And it may be a game of patience. It may take you a year or more, but that's why I'm also saying keep under everything in the risk registry. Remember, everybody has limited resource constraints. I think the other thing that I will say is enterprise risk management does have the ear of the executive leadership team more. So you may actually not get as far along in that, collaboration with them as you would like. So think about that. There are communication constraints sometimes. We do things differently in the United States, maybe than we do in Latin America and EMEA and Asia. So sometimes things need to be done. I'm not saying change anything in your program, but just realize, for example, if English is a second language or Arabic is a second language to somebody, it may need to take them a little bit longer to get things done. So you have to adjust and be agile on that. Now, I am going to say this. I've worked at companies with large global footprints. You do need to start and understand the corporate culture at your organization. Make sure you're using terminology that's used by your leadership team. Make sure that you are embracing things. If they have icons and programs to help you, then by all means, go do that. Make sure that also you're trying to bridge that cultural resistance. If you have, an internal Slack channel, set up something for your constituents for whether it be enterprise risk management and or business continuity, send them information about what's happening. Like, for example, this webinar, if there's a new piece of legislation that's going live somewhere next year, if there's just been something that's catastrophic that happened in another part of the world, say that could, that might be us, or if something happens to one of your competitors, look at that. And then I'm going to say it's the continuous monitoring and improvement. Everything gets better over time, but you need to make sure that you're working with your constituents to get things done. Like I said, if I've worked with you and you've reviewed and updated and approved a plan today on April 10th, 2025, I expect you to do that by April 10th, 2026. If not, I'm going to move you to go to red because you are not compliant. And also, we didn't talk about reporting, but figure out what's the preferred way of doing reporting at your organization. I know a lot of companies are using Tableau or Power BI. You want to make sure your reporting has the same look and feel as to what others are doing, because executive management are creatures of comfort. They like to see the same thing. And remember, when you present to leadership, you may only have 1 or 2 slides, but take time to put things in the appendix. They will do their reading, but remember, there might be a lot of material to cover in a 1-hour meeting. Therefore, the primary thing you want to communicate is in the first few slides, but get everything then into the appendix, okay? So, in conclusion, remember that enterprise risk management and business continuity need to work together to make sure that the risk the organizations need to look at to being resilient and sustainable are in aligned or are going to be moving forward, that you are working together to make sure that you're identifying risk and preparing for disruptions. You want to just make sure this is happening because, again, senior leadership's putting faith in both enterprise risk management and the business continuity management team, so that if something happens, the organization is going to get back up on their feet sooner rather than later. There may be a few bumps on the recovery, but that is your job, is to get things up and running. And remember, crisis management should only be invoked as needed. It shouldn't be something like happening every week or every month end or every quarter end. This should only be done as needed, and it should really be for what I'm going to say the large events. And then again, collaboration, the leadership between your department and the other department needs to be there. And communication, there needs to be open communication between both organizations so that they can find out what's happening in each other's world, learn when changes might be taking place, because that could affect your program and vice versa. So if you have not had those discussions, go have them. Like I said, if you don't have enterprise risk management at your organization, then go knock on the door of internal audit. They are probably fulfilling some type of a role to help support enterprise risk management at your organization. And if not, go ask them. And if they say no, well, then you move forward with your own definitions, but then find out who else is using risk terminology so that you can try and maybe get them onto the same page. I do want to, again, thank you. I do see there's one more question, Abu, that you put in the chat. I will address that, but I also realize we're getting close on time. Again, I do want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to come participate in this webinar. Again, I would also like to thank the Ministry of Communication and Technology in Saudi Arabia for extending a welcome to me. Feel free to reach out and find me. I am on LinkedIn. And if I have not had the capability to answer any questions that you might have at this point in time, feel free to reach out to me and ask them to me. I do want to go back and say, let me see. The most challenging is in the culture, in my opinion. Do you agree? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'm going to say this. There are some people who are at organizations who are just never happy, Abu. So sometimes, you've got to maybe put those people aside, but try and move the culture forward and try and start and figure out how you can overcome those challenges by adopting ways to embrace business continuity management at your organization and bring it along. A threat to one of the most important elements of managing civil society institutions. How can it be in light of new modernization? I'm sorry, I'm not sure what that means or if that's just a comment. Again, I want to say that I know I'm down to the last 2 minutes. If you have any other questions, now's the time for you to put them into the chat. I'm not seeing any new questions. So like I said, I look forward to, connecting with you in some opportunities via LinkedIn. I also will probably be back in, I was just recently in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh and Dubai in the UAE. So feel free to keep looking for me. Chances are I might be back in the region providing some training and or participating in other conferences. So I do hope to have the opportunity to meet some of you in person in the future. Thank you all very much. And I hope you found this insightful. Enjoy your weekend. And thank you very much for your time.